A millionaire CEO mocked his wife until she vanished. 3 years later, he begged forgiveness when he saw her with their twins. Ethan Carter had always believed that discipline and control were enough to keep his life exactly as he wanted it. From the outside, he looked like the perfect success story, a young CEO whose companies expanded faster than anyone could track, a man whose polished charm and precise manners impressed investors and intimidated rivals. But behind the glass walls of his office and the spotless luxury of his penthouse, Ethan allowed himself a different face, one that was harder, colder, more impatient than the image he presented to the world. He told himself that this was honesty, that Eliza deserved to see the real man she had married. The truth was that he resented how easily she could look at him with disappointment when he came home too late or forgot another dinner. He hated how her soft voice could turn brittle when she asked him why he never seemed to have time for anything but work. He convinced himself she was simply too sensitive, too idealistic to understand what ambition demanded. And so when she tried to talk about how lonely she felt or how worried she was about the future, he deflected her concerns with sarcasm and quiet contempt. He called her weak. He told her she had no idea how hard he worked to keep their life intact. In those moments, he believed it. The night she left wasn't marked by a fight or a slammed door. It was almost unremarkable. He had come home late, his tie loosened, his mind still full of figures and contracts. He noticed the living room was too quiet, but he didn't think much of it. Her suitcase was gone, but it took him longer than he would ever admit to realize she had taken it with her. On the kitchen counter lay a single sheet of paper folded in half. When he unfolded it, the note was written in her careful handwriting, "There's nothing left to wait for," that was all. No accusations, no demands. Just a sentence that landed like a stone in his chest. He stood there for a long time, the note trembling in his hand, before setting it back down with meticulous care. He poured himself a drink, walked to the window, and told himself this was her choice. She had always been too delicate for the life he wanted. In a week, maybe 2, she would come back. She would realize she'd overreacted, that he hadn't meant most of what he'd said, that he was doing his best. He believed this so completely that he felt no urgency to call her, no need to ask if she was safe. In his mind, it was inevitable that she would return. In the days that followed, he buried himself in work. If anyone at the office noticed that he was quieter than usual, that his temper flared more easily, no one dared mention it. He told himself the hollow feeling in his chest was simply the inconvenience of disruption, not regret. But sometimes, late at night, when the city glittered far below his windows and the silence stretched too wide, he caught himself wondering what she would have said if he'd asked her to stay. And in those moments, he hated how much he missed her. He told himself it would fade, that he would move on just as he always had. He had no idea that the absence he had created would turn into the one thing he could never outrun. 3 years passed in a blur of boardrooms, negotiations, and meticulously planned achievements that Ethan told himself were proof he had made the right choice. He traveled so often that the staff in his building stopped expecting him to come home before dawn. He became known for being the man who never lost focus, never wasted a moment on anything that didn't return a profit. The more his public reputation grew, the less he let himself think about the quiet apartment he came home to, where no soft laughter ever echoed, where no familiar voice ever asked how his day had been. If he caught a glimpse of a blonde woman passing on the sidewalk, or overheard someone with a gentle laugh that sounded too much like hers, he forced himself to look away. It was easier to pretend that he felt nothing. But some nights refused to be quieted by distraction. Those were the nights he would wake in the darkness with a sudden, crushing certainty that she was gone for good. He would lie there in the cold sheets, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment he could remember, how her eyes used to light up when she spoke about things she loved, how she always made coffee for him even when they weren't speaking, how she looked the last time he saw her, standing in the hallway with her suitcase by her side and her shoulders drawn tight as if she was bracing for a storm she already knew she couldn't survive. He never told anyone about these nights. During the day, he locked the memories away behind the same careful discipline he applied to every crisis. He convinced himself that missing her was weakness, that longing was an indulgence he couldn't afford. He told himself that whatever she was doing, wherever she had gone, she must be better off without him. That thought was meant to reassure him. It never did. The news came to him in the most ordinary way, and that was what made it so unbearable. He was leaving a lunch meeting when he happened to glance through the plate glass window of a cafe across the street. For a moment he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. There, by the window, sat Eliza. She looked older, more tired, perhaps, but still achingly familiar. Her hair was longer now, tied back in a loose braid, and her profile was turned toward someone small sitting beside her. It took him several seconds to understand what he was seeing. Two little girls, so identical it made his chest tighten, sat pressed against her sides. They couldn't have been more than 3. They had the same soft brown hair, the same delicate features that pulled at something in him he didn't know he still had. One of them looked up just then, and in the bright reflection of her wide, solemn eyes, he saw a color he recognized instantly. His own brown eyes looked back at him through her tiny, questioning gaze. He stood there on the sidewalk as people brushed past, feeling his heartbeat pound in his throat. He realized with an awful clarity that in all the years he had spent building a life without her, she had been building one without him too, one that mattered infinitely more than anything he had done. And all at once, the distance he had insisted on no longer felt like control. It felt like cowardice. He didn't remember crossing the street or pushing open the cafe door. He only knew he was inside, that Eliza had turned and seen him, and that the look in her eyes was something between shock and resignation. The girls fell silent, watching him with the innocent curiosity of children who had no idea how their presence was about to change everything. In that instant, every defense he had built cracked under the weight of what he'd lost. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't be too late. But as he looked at those two little girls, identical in every detail, he knew that late or not, this was the moment his life would finally start to be honest. Ethan stood there in the doorway, feeling as if the whole cafe had gone silent, though he knew that wasn't true. The espresso machine hissed behind the counter. Someone at the corner table was laughing too loudly into their phone. A barista called out an order. But in the space between him and Eliza, there was nothing except the tight pull of his own breath and the stunned, waiting gaze of the two little girls whose faces were so impossibly familiar. His mind scrambled for words, something polite or neutral he could pretend was enough, but nothing came. He could feel the weight of every moment he had missed pressing down on his ribs, making it almost impossible to stand upright. Eliza watched him with an expression that made him ache. She didn't look angry, though maybe that would have been easier. She just looked tired in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. Tired in a way that suggested she had already survived the worst thing she could imagine and had no energy left to be afraid of him. For the first time in years, he understood that there had never been any real victory in pushing her away. All he had done was leave her alone to carry something he should have shared. He took a few steps closer, close enough now to see the faint freckles on the girls' cheeks and the way their matching dresses were stained with crumbs from the pastry on the table between them. One of them held a stuffed rabbit by the ear, its fur worn down to a dull patch over the heart. The other watched him without blinking, her small hands curled protectively around her sister's arm. He wondered if they had any idea who he was, or if he was nothing but a stranger who had interrupted their afternoon. When he finally managed to speak, his voice didn't sound like his own. It was rough and small and almost pleading. "Eliza," he said, and even her name felt like something he no longer deserved to say. She didn't respond right away. Instead she reached for a napkin and wiped a smudge of jam from the corner of the closest girl's mouth. Only when she was sure the child was calm did she look up at him again. "I wondered if you'd ever see them," she said softly. "I used to think about what I would say if this moment happened." He swallowed, unable to look away from her eyes. "And what did you decide you'd tell me?" Her hand trembled just slightly where it rested on the table. "That you don't get to pretend you didn't choose this. That you don't get to walk back into our lives as if you didn't leave. He nodded, feeling the heat rush to his face. I know. I'm not here to pretend. One of the girls shifted in her chair, and her hair fell away from her face, revealing a delicate jawline he knew too well. It hurt in a way he hadn't known he was still capable of feeling. He sank into the chair opposite them and realized that he couldn't do any of the things he was used to doing. He couldn't negotiate, couldn't control, couldn't outmaneuver this. All he could do was sit there and let the truth lay him bare. Do they know who I am? He asked finally, though he was almost afraid to hear the answer. No, Eliza said, her voice low. They know about you. That you're their father. But they don't know why you're not here. He nodded again, staring down at the table because he couldn't bear the sight of the quiet judgment in their wide brown eyes. Can I? He swallowed, feeling his throat constrict. Can I talk to them? Eliza hesitated, then looked at her daughters. Girls, this is Ethan, she said gently. He's your father. For a moment, neither child moved. Then the one with the stuffed rabbit tilted her head, studying him with a seriousness that was almost too much to bear. Are you going to take us away? She asked, her voice so small and clear it sliced through the air. His chest constricted. No, he said, because that was the only promise he could make without lying. I'm not here to take you away. I'm sorry. I should have been here all along. Eliza's lips parted, as if she was about to say something, but she pressed them together again. He thought maybe she understood that there was no speech that could make up for lost time. No apology could erase the years she had spent alone. For the first time in as long as he could remember, Ethan Carter felt the certainty he'd built his life on shatter into something raw and unrecognizable. He didn't know if he could ever make things right. But as he looked at the girls, his daughters, he knew that whatever it took, he would spend the rest of his life trying. When Eliza finally agreed to let him walk them home, Ethan felt both relief and a kind of dread he couldn't have described if he tried. He offered to carry the bag she'd brought for the girls, and she didn't protest, which somehow made it worse. The four of them stepped out of the cafe and into the early evening light, and the city around them moved as if nothing had changed, as if this moment wasn't quietly rearranging the shape of his entire life. The girls each held one of Eliza's hands, their matching steps so natural that he felt like an intruder just for walking behind them. Every few seconds, one of them, he was still trying to remember which name belonged to which soft voice, would glance over her shoulder at him, as though checking to see if he was real. He kept replaying that question in his head, are you going to take us away? He wondered how many times in their short lives they'd worried about losing the only security they'd ever known. The thought was so painful he could hardly breathe around it. When they reached the crosswalk, Eliza looked back to see if he was still there. He knew she was measuring every move he made, every tone in his voice, trying to decide whether he was about to hurt them all again. He didn't blame her. If the situation had been reversed, he doubted he would have found her presence anything less than a threat. Their building was small, older than the sleek places he was used to, but the steps were clean and the potted plants on the windowsills were healthy. When she unlocked the door, the girls let go of her hands and scampered inside ahead of them, their shoes tapping softly across the worn wood floor. Ethan followed more slowly, feeling like he was trespassing. Eliza closed the door behind him without speaking and walked into the kitchen to set down the grocery bag. He stood near the entrance, taking in the space that had been their home while he'd been too proud or too afraid to ask where she'd gone. There were drawings taped to the refrigerator, childish loops of color spelling out names and crooked hearts. A row of tiny shoes was lined up by the door. On the narrow shelf in the living room sat a picture frame turned face down, and he didn't have to pick it up to know what it contained. He could feel every year he had missed pressing in around him, each one heavier than the last. The girls returned from the bedroom, now wearing matching pajamas decorated with stars. One of them, the one he thought must be Mila, clutched a stuffed rabbit in one hand and looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. After a moment she held it out to him, her small fingers gripping the worn ear. He took it slowly, his hand trembling more than he wanted to admit. The soft toy was lighter than he expected, but in that moment it felt like the most significant thing he had ever been trusted with. "Thank you," he said softly, his throat raw. She didn't smile, but she nodded once and returned to her sister's side. In the kitchen, Eliza was filling a kettle. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "They don't know everything," she said carefully. "They only know you weren't ready to be here. I told them it wasn't their fault." He felt something sharp twist in his chest. "It wasn't," he said immediately, though the words felt too small. "It was mine." She set the kettle down and finally met his gaze across the small kitchen. "I don't know why you're here now. I don't know if you think this is something you can fix." "I don't think I can fix it," he admitted, each word scraped raw. I couldn't keep pretending they didn't exist." "That you didn't." Her eyes shone for a second, but she looked away before he could be sure whether it was anger or something else. She crossed her arms over her chest. "I don't have the energy to figure this out for you," she said. "I've spent 3 years making sure they never felt like they weren't wanted." "I know," he said, because it was the only thing he could offer. "And I'm sorry you ever had to do that alone." For a moment, the only sounds were the soft bubbling of the kettle and the distant voices of the girls playing in the next room. He wished there were more words he could give her, but none would have made this easier. So he stood there, letting the silence say what he couldn't, that he saw what she had carried, that he finally understood the cost. When the kettle clicked off, she turned away to pour the water. He didn't follow. He just closed his eyes and let the ache in his chest remind him that this was real, that he could no longer pretend he hadn't chosen this absence. Whatever came next, he knew it had to begin with staying still long enough to feel what he had spent years trying not to feel. Ethan didn't expect her to invite him to stay for dinner, but when the girls appeared in the doorway to ask if he could help them set the table, Eliza only sighed and gave a small nod. He followed them into the kitchen feeling as though he were stepping into someone else's life, one that had kept going without him. The table was small and scratched in places, but it was obviously loved. The girls each knew exactly where their plates belonged, and they explained the rules to him in hushed, serious voices. Mila liked the blue cup, Ella wanted the spoon with the flowers on the handle, and they both needed their napkins folded into triangles. He did everything they asked, grateful for something tangible to focus on, something that felt like participation instead of regret. Eliza moved around the kitchen with a quiet efficiency that made it clear she had been doing this alone for a long time. She heated soup and buttered slices of bread while the girls chattered about a show they liked and took turns asking him questions he wasn't prepared to answer. Did he have a cat? Why did he wear shiny shoes? Why hadn't they seen him before? Each question was delivered with the blunt honesty only children possess, and each one landed in his chest like a small, necessary wound. He answered what he could, admitting he didn't have a cat, that his shoes were for work, that he should have come much sooner. When he said that last part, both girls went quiet. Mila studied him with wide eyes, as if trying to decide if she believed him, while Ella leaned into her sister's side, her little hand clutching the edge of the table. They ate in a quiet that wasn't quite comfortable but wasn't angry either. More than once, he looked up to find Eliza watching him with an expression he couldn't decipher. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't contempt, and somehow that was harder to endure. After dinner, the girls disappeared into their bedroom to pick out a bedtime story, leaving him alone with her in the kitchen. She began rinsing dishes without a word. He took a breath and reached for a towel to dry them, unsure if she would tell him to stop. But she only nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and kept working. They moved side by side in the small space, their shoulders brushing now and then, and he was startled by how normal it felt. As if this might have been their life if he hadn't walked away. When the last dish was stacked neatly on the drying rack, Eliza leaned her hands on the counter, her head bowed. Her voice was so soft he almost didn't hear it. They think you're a stranger who wants to be their friend. He swallowed, his throat tight. I don't blame you for telling them that. She shook her head without lifting it. I didn't know what else to say. You can't just appear after 3 years and expect them to understand. I know, he said. I don't expect them to. I don't expect you to. She finally looked up, and her eyes were tired in a way that made him want to sink to his knees and apologize until there was nothing left to forgive. But she didn't look away. Why now, Ethan? He had asked himself that question 1,000 times in the past week, and the answer still felt inadequate. Because I saw them. Because I couldn't keep pretending I hadn't made the worst mistake of my life. Her face didn't soften, but something in her shoulders seemed to ease. I'm not going to make this easier for you, she said. You don't get to step back in and feel better just because you finally showed up. I know, he said again, because anything else would have been an insult. From the hallway came the sound of small voices calling for their mother. Eliza straightened and took a deep breath. I'm not saying you can't be part of their lives, she said quietly. But if you are, you have to be all in. You don't get to disappear again. He nodded, feeling something inside him settle in a way it hadn't in years. I'm not leaving, he said, and he meant it with every cell of his body. She didn't answer, but she didn't argue. When she turned and walked down the hall to the girls' room, he followed, his heart pounding at the thought that this was the first small step towards something he might never fully deserve but would spend the rest of his life trying to earn. That night, Ethan sat on the edge of the living room couch, listening as Eliza read to the girls in their bedroom. The soft cadence of her voice carried down the short hallway, mingling with the occasional sleepy question and the rustle of blankets as they settled in for the night. He didn't try to pretend he belonged there, not yet. He kept his hands folded in his lap and studied the photographs lined up on the narrow shelf by the TV. There were snapshots of birthdays, blurry pictures of the girls at a park he'd never visited, a grainy image of Eliza smiling down at them as they clung to her legs. He realized with a hollow ache that he wasn't in a single frame, and he knew he had no right to feel sorry for himself. She had built a life around the space he had left behind, and she had done it without asking him for anything. When Eliza emerged, she looked surprised to find him still there, though she quickly masked it. She closed the door partway behind her, leaving it open just enough to hear if the girls called out. She seemed unsure what to do next, as if she hadn't planned for him to stay past dinner. For a moment they only looked at each other, and Ethan could feel how raw the distance between them still was. He gestured to the other end of the couch, and after a few seconds she sat, pulling her knees up and wrapping her arms around them. Neither of them spoke. The quiet was thick with everything they hadn't said, everything that had been waiting years to surface. Finally, he forced himself to break it. I know you don't owe me anything, he began, his voice low. Not an explanation, not a chance. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be here. For them. However you think is right. She didn't look at him as she answered. I don't know what's right anymore, she said. I've spent so long just trying to make sure they were happy. I didn't think about what it would be like if you came back. I wouldn't blame you if you told me to leave, he said quietly. I'd understand. Eliza closed her eyes, pressing her forehead to her knees. When she lifted her head again, her voice was steadier. I don't want to pretend this is easy. It's not. But I see the way they look at you, even now. Like they're waiting to find out if you're real. He felt something catch in his chest. I am, he said simply. I'm real. And I'm not going anywhere. She drew in a long breath, as if trying to gauge whether she believed him. They need consistency. You can't be here 1 week and gone the next. I know. His voice broke, and he didn't try to hide it. I won't be. The quiet stretched out again, but this time it felt different, less like a chasm and more like the fragile beginning of something neither of them could name yet. She shifted slightly, lowering her feet to the floor. They'll have questions, she said after a while. You'll have to answer them. You'll have to tell them why you weren't here. I will, he promised. I'll tell them the truth. And what is that? She asked, her eyes searching his face in the dim light. That I was afraid, he he said. That I made a choice I thought was right and it was the worst thing I've ever done. Her mouth trembled, but she didn't look away. For the first time, he thought maybe she saw past her anger long enough to glimpse the regret that had eaten him alive since the moment he saw those girls in the cafe. A small voice called from the bedroom, and Eliza stood, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She paused before she went to them. If you're going to be here, she said quietly, then you'll have to earn it every day. He nodded because it was all he could do. I will. She disappeared down the hall, and Ethan leaned back against the couch, feeling the tightness in his chest loosen by a fraction. He knew nothing had been forgiven. Nothing had been undone. But for the first time, he believed there was a path forward. It wouldn't be quick. It wouldn't be simple. But he was ready to walk it, even if it took the rest of his life. Ethan started coming back the next afternoon, unsure if Eliza would actually let him in again, but when she opened the door, she simply stepped aside without a word. The girls were sitting on the living room rug surrounded by a tangle of crayons and coloring books. When they looked up and saw him, their expressions were cautious but curious, and something in his chest tightened at how tentative their welcome was. He lowered himself to the floor beside them, careful not to crowd their space, and waited. It took several minutes before Mila slid one of the coloring books closer to him without meeting his eyes. It felt like the greatest invitation he had ever received. He picked up a crayon and began to fill in the edge of a cartoon flower. His hand was steady, but inside he felt as if he might break apart from the quiet enormity of it. Eliza stayed in the kitchen, tidying up and pretending not to watch, but he knew she was listening to every word, every hesitant question. Mila asked him what his favorite color was, her voice so soft he almost didn't hear it. He told her it was blue, the same as her dress. Ella wanted to know if he liked pancakes, and when he said yes, she nodded solemnly as if that confirmed something important about him. They didn't ask yet why he had been gone. He knew the questions were coming, but he was grateful for the grace of their innocence in those first small moments together. When it was time for dinner, he offered to help, and to his surprise, Eliza didn't argue. She passed him vegetables to chop, and they worked in an uneasy quiet punctuated by the girls' chatter from the table. He had never realized how many little routines were woven into their evenings: who got which plate, who always asked for extra milk, who needed to have their food cut into tiny pieces even though she insisted she was big enough to do it herself. Watching Eliza move through it all with tired patience made something twist in his chest. He had been so certain he knew what mattered, and yet he had missed this entire life growing up without him. After the girls were in bed, he stayed to wash the dishes again. Eliza dried them without comment, but this time she didn't look like she was waiting for him to leave. When they finished, they ended up in the living room again, both of them too exhausted to pretend they didn't have more to say. She sat in the armchair with her legs tucked under her, and he stayed on the couch, his elbows braced on his knees, staring down at the floor. "Do you ever think about what it would have been like if you'd stayed?" she asked finally. He lifted his head, meeting her eyes across the small space between them. "Every day." Her throat worked as she swallowed. "I used to imagine you coming home," she said. "I would think about all the things I would say to you if you knocked on the door. Some nights I'd rehearse it in my head, all the ways I'd tell you how much it hurt." He didn't move, afraid any reaction would break the fragile honesty between them. "And then one day," she continued, her voice thinner now, "I realized I didn't want to be angry anymore. I just wanted to be done." "I don't blame you," he said, his own voice unsteady. "You were right to leave." She looked away, blinking quickly. "That doesn't mean it was easy." He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't try to fill the silence. They sat like that for a long time, both of them caught between the past and whatever this was becoming. When she finally stood, he did too, thinking she was about to ask him to go. But instead she said, quietly, "You can come tomorrow, if you want." "I want," he said without hesitation. She nodded once, her gaze steady but tired. "Then come early. They'll be up by 7. Something in his chest eased, just a little. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. But it was permission to keep showing up, and for now, that was enough. Ethan arrived before 7 the next morning just as she had said he could. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring up at the second-floor window where the curtains were already moving, and realized his hands were trembling. It was a small thing, this coming back, but it felt like the most important commitment he had ever made. He knocked softly, almost afraid she might have changed her mind overnight. But when Eliza opened the door, she only looked at him for a moment with her guarded, tired expression and then stepped aside so he could come in. The girls were still in their pajamas, hair sticking up in soft tangles, faces bright with the simple excitement of morning. When they saw him, they didn't hesitate this time. Mila ran straight to him and wrapped her arms around his leg as if she had been waiting all night to do it. He bent and scooped her up, feeling her small weight settle against his chest in a way that made his throat burn. Ella hung back by the couch, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, but she didn't look afraid. She was studying him the same way she had in the cafe, like she was measuring whether he would still be here if she looked away. He helped them make breakfast, moving carefully in the kitchen so he didn't break the rhythm of their morning rituals. Eliza handed him plates without a word, and he set them out while Mila announced that he was going to sit next to her because he was big enough to reach the cereal. They ate together in a hush broken only by the girls' chatter and the scrape of spoons against bowls. Every time he looked up and saw them watching him, curious, expectant, so trusting it made his chest ache, he felt the weight of every choice he had made that kept him from this table. But there was no undoing the past, only the quiet resolve to be different now. After breakfast, the girls insisted on showing him their favorite game, a collection of mismatched wooden blocks they used to build houses that never stood for long. He sat cross-legged on the floor as they pressed pieces into his hands and explained in overlapping voices which blocks were special, and which ones were just regular. Eliza stayed by the doorway, her arms folded tight over her chest, but she didn't interrupt. He caught her watching them more than once, her eyes softening as she took in the improbable sight of all three of them on the rug, heads bent together in concentration. By mid-morning, Mila tugged at his sleeve and asked in her small, serious voice if he was coming back the next day. When he promised that he would, she nodded as if she'd been expecting that answer all along and turned back to her tower of blocks. Ella didn't say anything, but when he held out his hand to her, she came without hesitation, curling her fingers around his like she had always done it. The day passed in small, ordinary moments that felt extraordinary simply because he had never imagined he would be allowed to have them. He helped them tie their shoes, he read the same story 3 times because they begged him not to stop, he held Mila on his hip while she pressed her cheek to his shoulder and sighed like she had finally found her place. In the early evening, while Eliza washed dishes and he sat on the couch with both girls leaning against him, he looked around the small apartment and realized it had become something sacred to him, a place where he was no longer a stranger. When the girls finally drifted to sleep, Eliza came to stand beside him. She looked tired in a way that went beyond the day, but her voice was steady. "I don't know what this is going to look like," she said quietly. "I don't know how long it will take me to trust you again." "I don't either," he admitted, feeling no need to pretend. "But I'm not going to stop coming back." She nodded, her gaze lingering on the girls' sleeping faces. "They've been waiting for you," she whispered. "Even if they didn't know it." His chest tightened, and he looked at her, searching for any sign that she might ask him to leave. But she didn't. She just stood there with him, sharing the quiet. When he finally rose to go, he bent over the girls and kissed each of them, their hair warm and soft against his lips. As he straightened, he met Eliza's eyes again, and this time, there was something there he hadn't seen in years, something like the beginning of forgiveness. "I'll see you in the morning," he said, and she didn't argue. He stepped out into the hallway, closing the door softly behind him. For the first time in so long, he felt certain of one thing. He couldn't change the man he had been, but he could decide who he would be now. And he knew, as he walked down the stairs into the cool evening air, that he would spend the rest of his life showing up for them, proving that this time, he would never walk away again. I think the ending of this story is powerful exactly because it doesn't pretend forgiveness is simple or quick. It respects the reality that trust, once broken, can't be fixed with apologies alone. Instead, Ethan earns something more meaningful than instant redemption. He earns the chance to prove, day by day, that he has changed. What struck me most is that the story doesn't glamorize his regret or paint him as a hero just because he finally showed up. It's honest about how much harm he did by leaving and how heavy the consequences were for Eliza and the girls. But it's also hopeful, because it shows that sometimes love survives in quiet, patient ways, waiting to be rebuilt. To me, this is what makes the ending satisfying. It doesn't tie everything up in a perfect bow. It leaves space for doubt and struggle, but also for possibility. In the end, Ethan doesn't get a clean slate, he gets a chance to be better. And that feels more authentic, and ultimately more moving, than any dramatic declaration of love could have been.
Celine Ward's fingers trembled as they hovered above the keyboard. Not from nerves, not even from the 3 double-shot lattes she'd downed that morning to stay awake, but from pain. Sharp, low, rising. She gripped the edge of the marble desk, Dorian Kael's desk, as the next contraction hit her like a freight train. She bit her lower lip so hard she tasted blood. Her other hand clutched her abdomen. Breathe, Celine. Just breathe. Not here. Not now. Not when she was still supposed to be invisible. 8 months. 3 weeks. That's how long she'd concealed the truth inside the glittering walls of Kael Systems. How long she'd balanced spreadsheets and secrets, board meetings and morning sickness. The father of her child, her boss, stood 20 feet away, commanding the conference room like a general in his war zone. Unaware. Untouchable. Unforgiven. Celine, he called, not turning. The revised Hudson Bay projections? She jolted upright, blinking through the white spots in her vision. Almost ready, sir. Sir, that's what she still called him. Even after Vancouver. Even after the hotel suite, and the whiskey, and the way he pulled her into his arms like the world outside didn't exist. Even after that night that scorched her memory. The storm had grounded their private jet. They'd shared a suite, a single night that changed everything. He'd touched her like a man who didn't believe in second chances. He'd kissed her like he needed it more than breath. And then, the next morning, he was Dorian Kael again. Untouched. Untouchable. They'd never spoken of it again, and now she carried the living consequence of that night. A girl. His daughter. Her heart thundered in sync with the pain now seizing her lower back. She leaned down, pretending to pick up a pen from the floor, just to conceal the grimace twisting her face. She needed to get out. She needed... Celine, a familiar voice whispered, sliding in beside her. Kessia, her best friend, her lifeline. I came as fast as I could. You called me from the restroom. What happened? I think it's time, Celine whispered, her eyes glassy. Cassia's gaze dropped to Celine's trembling hands. Then her wide eyes darted to the pale sheen on her forehead. Okay. Deep breaths. Elevators this way. No one saw me come in. Let's go. Celine stood too quickly. The world spun. Her knees buckled, and Kessia caught her with one arm around her waist. As they moved toward the elevator, Celine cast one last glance toward the conference room. Dorian still hadn't noticed. He probably wouldn't until the delivery email bounced back from her inbox, until her desk sat empty, until her name stopped appearing on his calendar. That had been the plan all along. Leave quietly, start over, but fate had rewritten her timeline. And now, as the elevator doors slid shut, Celine knew. Everything was about to change. Hello, beautiful family. Have you ever had to keep a life-altering secret at work or from someone you love? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you are new here so you don't miss what happens next. Now let's continue. By the time Celine was 6 months along, she'd mastered the art of concealment. Wrap, dresses, tailored blazers, high-waisted skirts that flattered and disguised. She had backup outfits hidden in her car, a compact fan in her purse for the sudden flushes, and a bottle of ginger oil in her drawer for the nausea that struck mid-meeting. But her best weapon? Discipline. No one at Kyle Systems suspected a thing. Not the board. Not the nosy admin assistants on floor 23. And certainly not Dorian Kale, the man who made sharks look soft. He wasn't cruel. Just impossibly demanding, ruthless in precision. Every minute of his life was optimized, calculated, flawless. That's why Celine was hired in the first place. She didn't flinch. She didn't falter. She didn't fall. Until she did. 6 months earlier, the Vancouver storm had changed everything. They were grounded after a pitch meeting, fog blanketing the tarmac, every outbound flight canceled. Dorian hadn't looked particularly annoyed, just impassive, like weather was beneath his notice. "I'll book rooms," Celine had offered, already scrolling. "Just one," he said. Her fingers froze mid-scroll. "Sir?" His eyes didn't move from his phone. "There's a tech convention in town. Nothing left but presidential suites. I'll take the couch." He hadn't taken the couch. Not after the lights went out. Not after the tension between them finally snapped like a taut wire. 1 second, they were arguing over a firmware clause. The next, he was inches from her, voice gravel low, accusing her of looking at him like she wanted more. "And if I do?" She'd challenged. His mouth had been on hers before she could finish. They hadn't spoken during. No sweet words. Just mouths and hands and hunger. His jacket hit the floor. Her skirt followed. Her back arched against silk sheets while his fingers gripped her thighs with reverence and fury all at once. And after? He'd dress silently. By the time she woke, he was gone. Celine walked into the executive wing of Kyle Systems like she hadn't cried herself to sleep for nights afterward. Like she didn't throw up each morning in the restroom before anyone else arrived. Like her life wasn't ticking toward an impossible deadline. No one asked why she drank peppermint tea instead of espresso now. No one questioned why her stilettos had quietly been replaced with low-block pumps. Because she never gave anyone a reason to look too close. And Dorian Kale never looked twice. He barely looked once. He barked orders, scheduled investor dinners, demanded travel itineraries down to the minute. He didn't notice the shadows under her eyes, or how she flinched when the elevators jolted. She'd typed out her resignation letter 10 times, but every time her finger hovered over send, her heart whispered not yet, not yet. Not when part of her still longed for something that shouldn't exist. Not when her daughter deserved better than being a secret shame. Cassia, her best friend and only confidante, was the one who forced her to plan. "You can't keep doing this," Cassia said one night over Thai takeout. "He's going to find out." "No," Celine replied firmly. "He never will. You think you can hide this forever? A baby's not like an unpaid invoice, Cell. She'll cry. She'll need things. What if something happens?" Celine had no answer, so she made a decision. At 9 months, she would leave. New city, new identity if she had to. She had savings. She had a degree. She could freelance. Portland was only a few hours south. Quiet. Green. Far enough. She printed her final resignation letter on heavyweight paper, dated it, folded it, placed it in an envelope, and kept it in her purse like a live grenade. By her 8th month, breathing got harder. Buttons refused to fasten. She walked slower. Her back screamed every time she sat too long. And yet, she still made it to the office before anyone else. Still organized Dorian's schedule with robotic efficiency. Still stood in heels, shorter now, but still, during 12-hour pitch marathons. Only Cassia noticed the swelling. Only Cassia checked in daily. Only Cassia would know to come running when Celine finally made the call. Because she knew this illusion couldn't last forever. She just never expected it to end in blood. The moment the jet wheels scraped the runway, Celine knew something was off. Their pilot's voice had sounded too calm, the kind of calm that masked frustration. Fog advisory. No clearance to depart until the following morning. She'd expected Dorian to rage, to bark at someone, maybe even book a helicopter out. But he just stood, rolled his cuffs and said, "Find a suite. We'll regroup tomorrow." His voice was unreadable, just like his expression. Celine had swallowed hard. "Of course, Mr. KL." The room was quiet. No minibar hum, no traffic below, just the tick of the designer wall clock and the distant moan of the city beyond the fogged glass. Celine stood near the window in a bathrobe, fingers fidgeting with the hem. Her hair was damp from the rainfall outside. She'd gone for a walk to clear her mind, but came back even more tense. Dorian was in the living area, still in his suit pants, white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He discarded his tie on the back of a velvet chair. Their laptops sat closed, dinner untouched. The silence stretched like a wire between them, tight, thin, waiting to snap. "You've been quiet," he said. "So have you." He turned slightly, watching her in the reflection of the glass. "I don't do small talk," he murmured. "No," she replied softly. "You do dominance, structure, control." A beat passed, then another, and then, "Is that a complaint?" "It's an observation." He stood slowly, walking toward her like a man who hadn't yet decided if he was about to argue, or do something else entirely. Her pulse quickened. "You've been different since Zurich," he said, stopping a few feet away. She kept her voice neutral. "I've been busy." "No, you've been tense, distracted, angry, even." She turned her head. "You read a lot into things." "I read people," he corrected. "It's my job." "Then maybe you should look harder." Her voice broke slightly. "Because I'm standing right here and you still don't see me." His jaw tightened. His eyes darkened. And then it happened. Fast, reckless. He reached for her, pulled her against him, kissed her like he'd been holding back for a lifetime. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was a collision. Mouths crashing, hands frantic, hearts pounding. She gasped as he lifted her effortlessly, pressing her against the sweet wall. Her robe slipped, exposing bare skin. "Tell me to stop," he growled, voice low and taut. She didn't. Her hands gripped his shoulders as his mouth trailed down her neck, as his hands explored every inch of her like a man starved. She wasn't thinking. She was burning. He laid her on the bed like she was something sacred. He kissed her deeper, slower now, like he wanted to memorize her, and then his lips trailed lower. Her back arched, her breath caught, and for a long time, nothing existed but the rhythm they created together, the heat, the hunger, the unspoken need between them. Celine lay staring at the ceiling. Sheets twisted around her legs. Her chest still rose and fell fast. The air was thick with sweat and disbelief. Beside her, Dorian stood by the window, shirtless, a glass of something amber in his hand. He didn't speak, didn't look at her. She wrapped the sheet around herself and sat up. This was a mistake. His voice was clipped. "Yes," a dagger through her chest. She stood quickly, gathering her robe. "I'll sleep on the couch." He didn't argue, didn't stop her, didn't even turn. By the time she woke, the bed was cold. His luggage was gone. The suite was clean. He hadn't left a note. No text, no call. Just silence. Back in Seattle, he acted like it never happened, never touched her again, never even looked at her too long. And Celine? She'd cried for 2 nights straight. Then one morning she threw up, and everything changed. She stared at the positive test, her entire life flashing before her in pink lines. Dorian's voice echoed in her mind. "I don't do family. I don't do love. They're liabilities." Her hand trembled. Cassia knocked on the door. "Cell? Are you okay?" "No." That was the last time she said that word out loud. From that moment on, she had a mission: survive, protect her child, and never, ever let Dorian Kale know the truth. Until fate forced her hand. "Hello, dear family. This iZone night. One choice, one secret that changed everything. If you've ever faced the consequences of a single moment, drop your story in the comments. And please, Don't forget to like and subscribe, because the next part gets even more intense. Celine didn't scream when the first real contraction hit. She simply dropped her pen. It clattered against the marble desk, rolling until it tapped the edge and settled into silence. She gripped the underside of the table, her knuckles whitening as heat spread across her lower back like wildfire. Her breathing became shallow, controlled, barely. "Celine?" asked junior analyst Malik from across the room. "You good?" She nodded, forcing a tight smile. "Just hungry. Haven't had breakfast." He grinned and returned to his charts. No one else even looked up. Of course they didn't. No one paid attention unless Dorian Kyle did, and Dorian was locked in his glass-walled office overlooking the floor, laser-focused on the numbers dancing across his dual monitors. Celine closed her eyes and counted slowly. 10, 9, 8. The pain subsided. She exhaled shakily and pushed back from the desk, standing slowly. A second contraction seized her halfway up. Stronger, sharper. Her knees buckled slightly. She caught herself on the back of the chair and leaned into it. No, not here. Not in this glass tower. Not in front of interns and executives and him. Her water hadn't broken yet. She could still get out. She fumbled for her phone. Cassia, her emergency contact, her best friend. Celine fired a text with trembling fingers. "It's happening. Come now, office." She hit send, then pressed her hands to her lower abdomen. A tiny kick. Lyra. The name hadn't been spoken yet, not even whispered out loud, but Celine knew it was hers. She took a careful step, then another, down the corridor, into the private restroom near the elevators. She locked the door and braced both hands against the sink. Her reflection was pale, lips pressed into a bloodless line. Sweat beaded on her temple. Her bump, normally disguised beneath layers of fabric, looked undeniable now. "Almost there," she whispered to her belly. "Just hold on." Cassia didn't knock. She burst through the private elevator with panic written across her face. Celine was crouched behind the assistant's desk, eyes glazed, one hand between her thighs. "There's blood," Celine gasped. Cassia's heart dropped. "Okay, we're going to the hospital. No, I can't." Dorian's presentation. "Screw the presentation," Cassia snapped, hauling her up. "You're having a baby." They made it to the car. Barely. The Uber driver took one look at Celine, moaning in the back seat, and floored it. Rain slicked the roads. Cassia was breathing instructions, calling ahead to the hospital, while Celine screamed through the next contraction. Then, screeching brakes, a spin, impact. The car skidded into a lamppost with a deafening crunch. Celine's head slammed back. Her body jolted. Pain exploded through her abdomen. And then, wetness. Her dress soaked through. Blood. Too much blood. Cassia screamed. "She's pregnant. Help." Everything blurred. The paramedics. The flashing lights. The voices. Until everything went black. Dr. Maya Leung's voice was calm, assured. "She's in labor. Heavy bleeding, but we're stabilizing her." Cassia clutched her phone in trembling fingers. She's alone. The baby's father, he doesn't know. The doctor nodded. "We need to inform next of kin. I'll call him." Dorian Kale was mid-call with a Tokyo investor when the second phone rang. He ignored it. It rang again and again until the line disconnected. Annoyed, he finally glanced down at the screen. "Cassia Adebayo." He picked up. "What is it?" Her voice cracked. "It's Celine. She's in labor." Silence. A pin could have dropped and echoed for miles. "She's at Mount Providence. There was an accident. She's bleeding. They're prepping for delivery. She's asking for you." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The phone dropped to his desk with a thud. He was out the door seconds later. No bag. No jacket. Just keys, fury, and the sound of tires squealing through the parking structure. The first thing he heard when he stepped off the elevator was her scream. The second was his name. "Dorian." He ran. A nurse tried to stop him. He brushed past her like she didn't exist. And then, there she was. Celine, drenched in sweat, face contorted in agony, clutching the rails of the hospital bed. "I'm sorry," she sobbed when she saw him. "I was going to tell you." "Don't speak," he said, moving to her side, gripping her hand like steel. "Just breathe." Her fingers crushed his. He didn't flinch. Not when the contractions intensified, not when her screams echoed through the room. He stood rooted, anchored, present. He, who never allowed emotion, was now breathless watching the woman he once dismissed fall apart, bringing their child into the world. And then, a cry, sharp, high, alive. A nurse held up a squirming, red-faced newborn. "It's a girl," Dr. Leung smiled. They placed her gently onto Celine's chest. Celine wept. Dorian just stared. His throat closed. His daughter's tiny fingers curled instinctively around Celine's skin. The nurse glanced at him. "Would you like to cut the cord?" He stepped forward, numb, hands shaking. He cut the cord. Lyra cried harder. Celine looked up at him through lashes damp with tears. "She has your eyes," she whispered. He couldn't speak. He just cupped the baby's head with trembling fingers. "No," he finally said. "She has your soul. Hello, family of love and twilights. Moments like this redefine everything. Would you forgive someone who kept such a secret? Would you stand by them through pain and birth and truth? Share your thoughts below, and if this moment moved you, please like the video, and don't forget to tap the subscribe button, because there's more to come." The storm outside had calmed, but inside Mount Providence, Dorian Kale stood still as stone. He cradled his daughter like porcelain. Tiny, warm, breathing softly against his chest. He hadn't moved in hours. A billionaire, a CEO, a man feared in boardrooms across continents, now silenced by the weight of 7 pounds, 3 ounces of something he didn't know he could love this much. Celine was asleep. Her chest rose and fell steadily, the IV trailing from her hand. For the first time in years, Dorian wasn't thinking about market reports, stock value, or quarterly forecasts. He was thinking about eyelashes. His daughter's. Long, dark, curled against the softest skin he'd ever felt. She cooed in his arms, and something inside him cracked all over again. When Cassia had called, something inside Dorian shifted. Not snapped, shifted. Like tectonic plates beneath the surface of a quiet city. He'd always prided himself on awareness, reading people, patterns, behavior. But somehow, he'd missed this. Celine's pale face, the way she sat at her desk with her shoulders hunched, the early departures, the subtle changes in her clothing. She'd hidden it all, right in front of him, and he had let her. Worse, he'd never asked. Now, as he sat in a hospital suite holding the result of that silence, he realized what terrified him most. How close he'd come to never knowing. If she had left, if something had gone wrong. He looked over at her, sleeping, exhausted, beautiful. He'd almost lost them both. Her eyes fluttered open slowly. The room was dim, moonlight spilling through the windows. Her first instinct was panic. Where was the baby? Then she turned her head. There they were. Dorian, still in his sweater from the office, now cradling their daughter against his chest like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her heart ached. "Hey," she whispered, voice rough. His eyes lifted immediately. "Hey, you named her?" "I waited," he said. "For you?" She bit her lip. "Do you hate me?" "I don't know what I feel," he replied honestly, looking down at the baby. "But I know I'd never forgive myself if I lost this. Her. Both of you." A beat of silence passed. "Her name is Lyra," Celine whispered. "I've always wanted that name." He repeated it quietly. "Lyra Kale. She sounds permanent. She is." His voice didn't shake, but his hand did, just slightly, as he reached out to touch Celine's fingers. They stayed like that for a while. No titles, no business, just silence and breath, and 3 heartbeats finally aligned. Dorian didn't let anyone else handle the paperwork. Not his legal team, not his driver, not even Cassia. He signed everything himself. He carried Celine's bag. He helped her into the town car. And when she tried to protest, "You don't have to do this, you know," he met her eyes and said, "Yes, I do." They rode in silence. Celine looked out the window, eyes glassy, cheeks still pale from the trauma of delivery. Dorian looked at her, often, as if memorizing the new version of her. Mother. His driver pulled up to an unfamiliar building, sleek glass, towering high above downtown. Celine blinked. "Wait, this isn't my apartment." "No," he said simply. "It's my home." She'd imagined it 1,000 times. Marble floors, clean lines, cold design. But now? Now it had bottles on the counter, a bassinet near the fireplace, soft pink blankets folded on the edge of a cream leather couch. The air smelled of baby lotion and something else, warm vanilla maybe. Home. He led her inside, then paused at the door, as if asking permission without saying it. She stepped forward, and didn't look back. Celine hadn't expected the first scream to be her own. Not like that. Not ragged, guttural, pulled from some primal place inside her. But that's what it felt like, being ripped open, not just in body but in truth. She'd spent almost 9 months hiding. Now, there was nowhere left to hide. The pain hit again. Her hands gripped the hospital bed rails. Her breath came in jagged gasps. Sweat streamed down her temples as her body convulsed with effort. A nurse's voice pierced through the haze. 9 centimeters. Almost there. Keep breathing. Another contraction. Another scream. And then, Dorian. It slipped from her lips like a prayer. A plea. She wasn't sure he would come. Not after everything. But then the door flew open. And there he was. His chest rose and fell fast. His eyes locked on hers. He crossed the room in 3 strides, ignoring the nurse's protest. "I'm here," he said, grabbing her hand. "I'm not leaving." Celine sobbed, not from pain, but from something deeper. She couldn't say it, but he heard it anyway. "I didn't think you would come." His fingers laced through hers. "Breathe with me," he murmured. "You're almost there." The room was chaos. Monitors beeped. Nurses moved quickly. Dr. Leung stood at the foot of the bed, calm and focused. Celine's world narrowed to 2 things, the searing pain in her body and the steel grip of Dorian's hand in hers. "You're doing amazing," he said, voice thick. "Liar," she rasped. "No," he whispered. "You're the strongest person I've ever seen." Another push, another wave of pain. And then, "Okay, Celine, one more big push," Dr. Leung said. "She's almost here." Celine cried out, body straining with everything she had left. And then the pressure broke. A single moment of silence, followed by a piercing, perfect cry. The baby was lifted into the air. Dorian blinked, stunned. He stared like he was seeing color for the first time. "A girl," Dr. Leung announced. "You've got a beautiful baby girl." The nurse moved swiftly, placing the newborn on Celine's chest. Tiny, wrinkled, red, breathing. Alive. Celine gasped and clutched her. Her daughter. Their daughter. She looked up at Dorian, tears rolling down her cheeks. "She's here." He couldn't speak, just stared. Then slowly reached out a hand, brushing his finger along the baby's cheek. So soft, so real, so his. Minutes later, a nurse took Lyra briefly to clean and swaddle her. Dorian followed, watching every step, every motion, as if he might never forgive them for doing it wrong. When he returned, she was bundled in soft pink and resting quietly. He placed her back into Celine's arms, kneeling beside the bed. "I don't know how to do this," he said. Celine looked down at Lyra. "Neither do I. But I want to try," he whispered. "If you'll let me." She turned toward him. "Why now?" His voice cracked. "Because I watched her come into this world, and I felt something break inside me, and I don't ever want to be the kind of man who can walk away from this." Later that night, Celine lay awake while Lyra slept in her bassinet. Dorian was by the window again. This time, he turned first. "I keep thinking about the last 9 months," he said. "How many times I almost asked if something was wrong, but I didn't." "You weren't supposed to," she replied softly. "We agreed to forget." "I didn't forget," he said. Her breath caught. "I thought about that night more times than I can count," he admitted. "But I convinced myself it meant nothing." She smiled faintly. It meant everything. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Dorian crossed the room and sat beside her. "I don't want to forget anything anymore," he said, voice low. "Then don't." He reached out, touching her hand. And for the first time since it all began, Celine didn't pull away. Some bonds are forged in silence, others in pain, but the strongest come through both. If you've ever held on to love through chaos, share your journey. Like, comment, and subscribe to see how Celine and Dorian's story unfolds from here. Mount Providence Medical Center, postpartum suite, 2 hours after birth. Celine stirred awake to soft murmurs and the rhythmic clicking of a chair gently rocking. Her body ached in places she didn't even know could ache. Her mouth was dry, but her arms were empty. She turned her head toward the window, heart pounding, and then she saw them. Dorian, rocking slowly, holding Lyra. His face was unreadable, but his arms were gentle, his hands sure. His thumb stroked their daughter's back with reverence. He hadn't noticed her wake. That gave her a moment to look at him freely. This man who terrified boardrooms, who made CEOs tremble, who could end negotiations with a single raised brow, now sat barefoot in hospital scrubs, completely spellbound by a girl the size of his forearm. "I don't think she likes the moonlight," he murmured, still looking down at the baby. "She kept squirming when I turned toward the window." Celine's voice was low. "She takes after me." He turned then, eyes meeting hers. A flicker of something passed between them, relief maybe, or something deeper. "She's been awake?" she asked. "She barely slept. She'll do that to you." She smiled faintly. "I don't mind," he said. He stood slowly and carried Lyra back over to the bed. His steps were careful, calculated, but softer than she'd ever seen. Celine shifted, sitting up as he gently passed the baby to her. Lyra gave a tiny sigh, curling into her mother's chest. "Did they give her a name for the record?" he asked. "I told them to wait." He nodded. "You had one in mind?" "Yes," she said. "Since college. Before any of this." "What is it?" She looked up. "Lyra." He didn't speak right away. Instead, he repeated it, quietly, reverently. "Lyra Kyle." Celine tilted her head. "You're okay with that?" He met her gaze. "She's ours. I wouldn't have chosen anything else." They sat in silence, the air between them heavy with everything unsaid. Finally she broke it. "You asked me why I didn't tell you." He nodded once. "I wanted to," she whispered. "So many times, but after that night, you shut down, and I wasn't sure what it meant to you, what I meant." He said nothing. "I convinced myself you'd call it a distraction," she continued, "that you'd say it ruined your focus." He turned toward the bassinet now resting beside the bed. "I probably would have." She swallowed hard. "That's why I stayed quiet. I didn't want to give you a reason to resent her. Or me." His hands curled into fists. "I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid you'd order me to fix it, make it go away. That you'd see this as weakness." He looked at her then, and his voice was low. "I wouldn't have. You wouldn't have wanted it." "I didn't know what I wanted," he said. Her throat tightened. "But now," he said, stepping forward, "now I want everything I didn't know I was missing." She blinked. "Like what?" "Like the way you whisper her name when you think no one's listening, the way your eyes lit up when she first kicked, the way you protected her from me, because you thought I'd fail her." He paused, then knelt beside the bed. "I'm not asking you to forget what I said, or what I didn't say, but I'm asking you this. Don't shut me out now." Celine looked down at Lyra, sleeping peacefully against her. "I don't know how to do this with you," she admitted. "I had a plan, a solo plan. I don't need a perfect version of you," he said. "I need the real one, the one who rolls her eyes at board meetings and eats mango slices at her desk at 9 a.m. She laughed softly. "And you?" "I'm not who I was," he said. "I don't want to be." Later that night, they didn't sleep. Instead, they took turns holding Lyra, feeding, changing her. It was awkward, messy. Celine spilled formula on her blouse. Dorian cursed when he snapped the diaper wrong. But they laughed, together. At 3:12 a.m., Celine caught Dorian watching her rock the baby. "What?" she asked. "You look like a queen," he said quietly. "Covered in spit up? Still a queen?" She shook her head, cheeks warm. "You're strange. You bring it out in me." They smiled at each other, and for the first time, Celine believed they might actually have a chance. Celine stepped into the penthouse like she was crossing a border, not into wealth, not into extravagance, though it was certainly both, but into the unknown. This wasn't a hotel. This wasn't a hospital suite. This was Dorian Cale's home. And now, temporarily, or maybe not so temporarily, hers too. The air smelled of sandalwood and soft linen. The ceilings were cathedral high. The windows stretched wall to wall, and beneath them was the city's skyline glittering beneath dusk. But that wasn't what caught her attention. It was the bassinet by the fireplace, the tiny white basket with a rose-colored blanket tucked neatly inside, and the bottle warmer next to a sleek designer couch, and the brand-new diaper bag leaning against an armchair. None of this had been here before. She glanced at Dorian, who was placing her bag down gently by the stairs. "You did all this?" He looked up, only slightly defensive. "I called a consultant." "A consultant? A newborn specialist," he said, "and an interior organizer." They had a checklist. She arched a brow. "You hired a team?" "I don't know what I'm doing," he said bluntly. "So I did what I do best. I hired people who do." There was no smugness in his tone, just quiet, earnest effort. She nodded, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. "Thank you. You shouldn't have to do everything alone anymore," he said. "Not here." Later that night. The penthouse was quiet. Celine had put Lyra down in the bassinet after her evening feeding and walked quietly into the kitchen in search of water. That's when she saw him, shirtless, standing at the counter, prepping a bottle under warm light. His back was to her, muscles shifting as he worked with practiced movements. She paused in the hallway, pulse skipping. She hadn't seen him like this since Vancouver, and that memory still lived in her skin. He sensed her presence and turned. "You're awake," he said. She nodded. "She's asleep." "For now," he said, pouring the formula. "I give it 10 minutes. He glanced at her. His eyes moved down briefly to her bare legs, the silk hem of her robe, then back to her face. A silent current passed between them. Celine stepped into the kitchen, leaning against the counter. "You're surprisingly good at this. I read all the instructions twice," he said, "and still triple-check everything. CEO instincts?" "Father instincts," he corrected softly. She stilled. He met her gaze. "Why didn't you tell me, Celine?" There it was. The question they'd danced around but hadn't truly faced. "I was afraid," she whispered. He set the bottle down. "Of me?" "Of everything," she said. "You once said love makes you weak, that family distracts from greatness. I was wrong. You were cruel." He didn't deny it. She walked around the island until they stood close. "I didn't want our daughter to be resented. I didn't want her to be the reason you lost your edge, or worse, the reason you hated me." His hands clenched at his sides. "I don't hate you," he said. "But you didn't love me either," she said. "I didn't know what love looked like until 3 nights ago." Silence. Then he reached for her, slowly, as if asking permission. When his fingers brushed her jaw, she didn't pull away. "You're not just the mother of my child," he said, voice rough. "You're the only person who's ever made me want more than power." She exhaled, and then he kissed her, not tentative, not apologetic, but with the kind of hunger that said finally. Celine moaned softly as he lifted her effortlessly, sitting her on the cool marble counter. His mouth trailed down her throat, hands sliding under her robe. Her body responded before her mind caught up. She had missed this, missed him. The way he touched her like she was something rare. The way he gripped her thighs with reverence. The way he looked at her, eyes dark, lips parted, like she was his undoing. "Tell me to stop," he murmured against her skin. "Don't you dare," she whispered. Clothes were pushed aside. Skin met skin. There was no rush, only heat. He kissed her slowly, deeply, his hands steady as he guided her to the edge, letting her fall apart in his arms before following close behind. They collapsed into each other, breathless, undone. Her forehead pressed to his, and for a moment the world was silent. No company, no fear, just them. He pulled her into his chest, heart still racing. "I thought I had everything." She ran her fingers across his collarbone. "You didn't?" "I had nothing," he said. "Not really." She looked up. "And now?" "I have you," he whispered. "And her." He paused. "If you'll stay." Celine blinked, then kissed him again. A slow, intentional yes. The morning after, Celine stood at the stove, barefoot, her hair pulled into a loose knot. The sun streamed in through the massive windows, lighting up the penthouse with a soft glow. The smell of cinnamon and vanilla hung in the air from the French toast she was trying, and mostly failing, to perfect. Dorian walked in, shirtless, sleep still in his eyes, holding Lyra cradled against his chest. She was wrapped in a pale rose blanket, her tiny face nestled close to his heartbeat. Celine turned when she heard him. He stopped. For a long moment, he just looked at her, like the image of her standing in his kitchen, cooking with his daughter warming against his skin, was something he didn't want to blink away. "Morning," she said softly. He walked closer, one arm still wrapped around Lyra. Smells incredible. I burnt the first batch. I'll eat it anyway. She smiled. He leaned in, kissed her temple, and handed her the baby. Your turn. Celine took Lyra gently and held her close. Dorian stayed beside them, watching. I haven't slept like that in ever, he said. Feels different, doesn't it? She murmured. He looked at her. Everything feels different. They stood in silence, the kind that didn't require words. But then the silence turned heavy. Later that day, they sat on opposite sides of the sectional. Lyra was asleep in her bassinet nearby. I need to ask you something, Dorian said. Celine folded her legs underneath her. Okay. When you found out, what were you going to do? She didn't answer immediately. Then, I was going to disappear. He flinched. I had a job offer in Portland. My lease was month to month. I'd saved just enough to leave cleanly. His hands clenched. You would have left without saying anything? I thought I was doing what was best for her, she said. And for me, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Do you still think that? No, she whispered. Not after seeing you with her. He let out a breath. You've got this terrifying power over me, Celine. Always have. That's ironic. You're the one who signs my paychecks. He looked up sharply. Not anymore. She blinked. What? I've already informed HR. You'll transition out of your assistant role. Starting next week, you'll be creative director for Ward Kale Foundation. Her jaw dropped slightly. That's not a real division. It is now, he said. You're already the reason it exists. Her heart thudded. Dorian, I don't want you working beneath me, he said, voice steady. I want you beside me. Later that night, he took her upstairs. The rooftop was quiet, blanketed in twilight. City lights blinked far below. Celine stepped into the garden, stunned. This is beautiful. Soft hanging lanterns swayed gently. A small table for two stood near the edge, overlooking the skyline, and beside it, a bassinet cradle. I had them install that today, he said. For up here? For wherever you want to be. She turned toward him. You're trying really hard. I'm not trying, he said. I'm choosing. She blinked. Choosing what? He stepped closer. You, her, this life. Every day. Celine didn't answer, so he took her hand. I never had anyone to look up to growing up, not like this. No example, no softness, just expectations and steel. And for a long time, I believed that love would make me weak, that family would undo everything I built. She swallowed. And now? He exhaled. Now I look at you and realize I was already undone. I just didn't know it until you gave me something real to lose. A long silence followed. Then Celine leaned into him, rested her head on his chest. Okay, she whispered. Okay. She looked up. Let's see where this goes. His fingers slid into her hair, and he kissed her, soft this time, reverent, real. They lay together in bed, Lyra asleep in her crib nearby. Celine curled against Dorian's side, listening to the sound of his breath slowing. He spoke without opening his eyes. Do you think she'll remember this? Celine smiled. No, but we will. 3 days later, Midtown Seattle, 7:42 a.m. Celine had just fastened the last snap on Lyra's onesie when her phone buzzed. She reached for it, half distracted. Cassia, turn on the news. Now. Her heart skipped. She tapped the remote and switched to Channel 8. The headline slapped across the screen like a slap to the face. Mystery woman leaves hospital with Kyle Systems CEO. Baby in tow. And then the images rolled in. Photos, grainy but clear enough. Celine exiting Mount Providence in a wheelchair, baby wrapped in pink, Dorian close behind with one hand protectively on her shoulder. Another shot of him helping her into the car. Someone must have leaked it. A nurse, a bystander, a paparazzo. Her stomach churned. She switched channels. More headlines, more speculations. Is this Dorian Kale's secret family? From assistant to mother of the heir? Corporate scandal or modern fairy tale? She turned off the TV. Her pulse thundered. Dorian's penthouse, office. He was already on the phone. No comment at this time. No, I will not confirm or deny that. And I expect every single one of you to hold the line. Celine stepped in just as he ended the call. His jaw was locked, his shoulders rigid. He looked at her. "I'm sorry. I should have seen this coming." "You couldn't have," she said quietly. "I should have had the hospital locked down, cleared the exits, paid extra for privacy." "Dorian," she interrupted, "it doesn't matter." He stared at her, something close to guilt flickering in his eyes. "We'll handle it," she added, "but we need to do it together." Hours later, emergency boardroom meeting Kyle Systems, 32nd floor. Every board member was already seated when they arrived. Flashbulbs had followed them from the parking structure up to the elevator. The company's PR director looked 2 seconds from a full-blown breakdown. Dorian entered with Celine beside him. She wore a deep navy pantsuit and carried herself like she belonged, because she did. But her heart thundered in her chest. She didn't flinch when they stared, didn't look away when whispers passed between executives. Dorian opened the meeting without hesitation. This company was built on precision, on strategy, and on loyalty, but it was also built on vision, and I was blind to the most important thing I ever created. Silence fell. I failed to see the woman who has kept this company running, the woman who raised our standards, who protected our reputation more fiercely than any legal department ever has. He turned toward Celine. I also failed to recognize my role in something bigger than quarterly growth. There was a murmur, a tension building. Then he said it. "Celine Ward is not just my former assistant. She is the mother of my child. And as of this morning, she is also the new director of strategic vision for the Ward Kale Foundation." Gasps. Eyes widened. A few jaws dropped. And then she stepped forward. Celine's speech. "I never wanted to be part of a scandal," she began. "I didn't want headlines, or attention, or anyone's pity. I made a decision to hide something very personal, out of fear, out of survival, but I will never apologize for loving my daughter, or for choosing to protect the man who gave her to me, even when he didn't ask for it." Her voice didn't shake. "I know some of you are wondering what this means for the company. Let me be clear. It means evolution." She looked directly at the most conservative board member in the room. "This company has always operated like a fortress. But fortresses don't evolve, they rot. The Ward Kale Foundation will be our first step toward building legacy, beyond steel, code, and profit margins." The room was silent for a long beat. Then, a single clap. Regina Dumont, the only female board member. Then another, and another, until the room filled with applause. As the crowd dispersed, Celine stood beside Dorian near the windows. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I think I am. You handled them better than I ever did." "I'm used to babysitting powerful men," she said with a smirk. He chuckled. "Remind me to put that on your business cards." They stepped out together, hand in hand. The crowd outside roared. Questions flew. "Mr. Kale, are you two together?" "Celine, were you pregnant while working as his assistant? Is this your heir? Are you getting married?" Dorian paused, then turned to Celine. "Your call," he whispered. She looked out at the cameras, then down at Lyra, safely cradled in her arms, then back up. She stepped forward and said clearly, "We'll answer one question." The press held their breath. A young female reporter near the front called out, "Are you in love?" Celine looked at Dorian. He met her eyes. Then he said, "Yes." One word, but it changed everything. The crowd erupted. Flashbulbs exploded. But Celine didn't hear it, because Dorian leaned close, his lips near her ear, and whispered, "I meant it." The day after the reveal, in Ward Kale Media Room, Celine sat under the blazing studio lights, her spine straight, lips painted with a confident shade of wine red. Beside her, Dorian adjusted his jacket once, then remained still. The cameras were live, and so were a million eyes. They'd agreed to the interview that morning. A single public statement, controlled, clear, definitive, enough to settle the press without letting them feed off chaos. The journalist, Fiona Kell, sat across from them, a seasoned pro with a reputation for getting answers others couldn't. Fiona smiled tightly. "Let's get straight to it." "Why now?" Celine took a breath. "Because silence became more dangerous than truth." "And your daughter? Was her birth a surprise for Mr. Kale?" Dorian spoke now. "Yes. But the mistake was mine. I created an environment where honesty didn't feel safe. That's on me." Fiona arched a brow. You're saying this was your fault? I'm saying I was emotionally unavailable, stubborn, and blind to the woman who stood beside me every day. Celine glanced sideways at him, stunned. Fiona pivoted. And now? Now, Celine said firmly, we're choosing to raise our daughter with transparency and courage, even if the world watches. The rest of the questions were easy. Plans for the foundation, work-life balance, boundaries with the press. But when Fiona closed with, is love enough to hold you through this storm? Dorian didn't hesitate. Yes, he said, without even glancing at Celine. Because I've seen what it looks like to lose it. Celine leaned against the railing of the balcony, watching the rain streak the glass. Dorian approached from behind, sliding his arms around her waist. You were incredible, he said. So were you, she whispered. I meant what I said in there, he added. I know. She turned to face him. What now? She asked. We live, he said. One day at a time. No secrets, no pretending. Celine rested her head against his chest. Do you think the board will stick to their support? Yes, he replied. But even if they don't, I already have what matters. He kissed the crown of her head. You, he said. And her. The event was held in a newly renovated hall in the heart of the city. Donors, business leaders, and influencers attended. Celine stood at the podium, Lyra in her arms, Dorian beside her. Flashes lit the air. 1,000 lenses caught the image of power, family, redemption. She began to speak. I used to think ambition and motherhood were enemies, that you had to sacrifice one to protect the other, but I was wrong. She adjusted Lyra gently. This foundation represents a future where women don't have to choose between their dreams and their truth. Applause erupted. She stepped aside, letting Dorian take the mic. For years, I built Kyle's systems to be indestructible, he said. But indestructibility came at a cost. Humanity. Now, we rebuild with purpose. He looked at Celine. And with soul. Celine rocked Lyra slowly. The baby was almost asleep. Dorian leaned in the doorway, arms folded, just watching. You always look like a goddess with her, he said softly. She's the only thing that makes sense some days. I need something else to make sense too. He stepped into the room, took her hand. I love you. Her breath caught. I love you, he repeated. Not because you gave me a daughter, but because you gave me a reason to be better. You saw something in me when I didn't. Dorian, he dropped to one knee. No ring, no theatrics, just truth. Marry me, Celine Ward. Tears slipped from her lashes. She lowered herself to her knees beside him, cradling his face in her hands. Yes, she whispered. Yes. The three of them curled on the couch, Lyra asleep between them, the fireplace crackling low. No cameras, no headlines, just quiet. Celine rested her head on Dorian's shoulder. You think this is our happy ending? He shook his head. No. She looked up, puzzled. It's our beginning. Rain tapped gently on the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights dim behind the foggy glass. The penthouse felt quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that wrapped around you like a blanket. Celine sat in the glider, rocking slowly. Lyra was swaddled and asleep against her chest, her tiny breath warm and rhythmic. The mobile spun slowly above the crib, handcrafted wooden stars casting soft shadows across the room. Dorian stood at the doorway. He didn't speak right away, just watched. She looked up when she sensed him, offering a tired but content smile. I was just about to put her down, she whispered. He nodded. Celine gently shifted, placed Lyra into the crib with practiced care, then rose, smoothing her robe as she turned toward him. Is something wrong? She asked. No, he said. Something's finally right. He took a step forward, then another, until he stood just inches away, close enough that she could feel the tension in his body, the anticipation, the weight of something unsaid. I've been rehearsing this all day, he said. She blinked. Rehearsing what? I had a whole plan, he continued. Something grand, something worthy of the way you've changed my life. Dorian, I even thought about doing it at the gala, he said with a self-deprecating smile. Stage lights, champagne, applause. She raised a brow. Why didn't you? Because none of those things matter to you, he said softly. You'd hate all of that. She chuckled. Not wrong. He took her hand. pressed it against his chest. "I thought I needed an empire," he said. "But what I really needed was someone who'd see through all of that, who'd still believe in me when I had nothing left to prove." Her throat tightened. "You came into my world quietly, efficiently, without expectation," he said. "But you ended up becoming the one thing I never saw coming." Celine's eyes shimmered. He lowered to one knee. No box, no ring, just eyes full of truth. "I want to build the rest of my life with you, as your partner, as Lyra's father, as your husband." Her lips parted, breath catching. "I love you," he said, "and I will spend every day earning the trust I broke and deepening the love you gave me freely." Her legs gave out. She dropped to her knees too, cupped his face, and kissed him, long, soft, certain. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. 1,000 times yes. They sat on the plush rug, their backs against the crib. Celine rested her head on his shoulder. "Are we insane for doing this so fast?" she asked. He tilted his head. "Maybe. Do you care? Not even a little?" She smiled. Their fingers intertwined. Lyra stirred in her sleep, but didn't wake. Dorian looked down at the woman who had dismantled his armor and filled the empty corners of his life. And for the first time in decades, he didn't feel like a man running from something. He felt like a man running toward everything that mattered. The lobby sparkled with crystal lighting, polished granite floors reflecting the movement of hundreds of guests dressed in gala finery. Waiters moved gracefully through the crowd with trays of champagne. Cameras flashed. Murmurs buzzed. The city's elite had arrived in full force. But all eyes turned when she entered. Celine Ward, now Celine Kael, stood in a custom crimson gown that hugged her body with elegance and pride. Her posture was regal, her presence effortless. In one arm she held Lyra, dressed in rose silk with a tiny ribbon around her wrist. And beside her stood Dorian Kael. Hand in hand, they approached the stage. The applause was warm and thunderous as Dorian stepped to the microphone first. "We designed this building to reflect our values," he said, voice confident, clear. "Not just glass and walls, but truth and transparency. This is the first of many spaces where legacy will mean more than profit margins." He turned to look at Celine, because the real legacy of a company, or a man, isn't written in stock prices. It's written in the lives you protect and the people you love. He stepped back as Celine took his place. She adjusted Lyra gently in her arms and smiled at the crowd. "As someone who once believed she had to hide to survive, I stand here to tell you this. No woman should be forced to choose between her future and her truth." Silence fell like reverence. No woman should ever have to shrink for a title or disappear to be respected, and no child should ever begin their story in secrecy. Applause broke out again, louder this time. She nodded once, then stepped back. Rain whispered against the glass again, the city below gleaming like a field of stars. Celine stood barefoot in her dressing robe, her hair loose, skin still glowing from the night's spotlight. Dorian joined her, holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed her one and leaned against the balcony railing. "She was perfect tonight," he said. "Didn't even fuss. She's clearly born for high society," Celine smirked. "Unlike her mother." Dorian turned toward her. "Don't say that." She tilted her head. "Why?" "Because tonight wasn't about high society," he said. "It was about you, your voice, your courage." She looked down into her mug. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had left? If you hadn't come to the hospital that night?" He exhaled slowly. "I don't wonder. I fear it." She met his gaze, and there it was again, that vulnerable clarity in his eyes. The man who once lived behind steel walls now stood open, unarmored. "You changed everything, Celine," he said. She stepped closer. "So did you." He took her hand, drew it to his chest. "I may have built Kael systems," he whispered, "but you gave me something no architect ever could." "What?" He pressed his lips to her forehead. "Home." They lay in bed, Lyra asleep in the adjoining room. Celine curled into his side. Dorian ran a hand through her hair, his voice low. "Next year," he said, "I want to take a sabbatical, just us, Paris, Rome, maybe somewhere quiet with trees." She smiled into his chest. "You? Quiet? For you? Always." She kissed his shoulder, then closed her eyes. And somewhere in the soft darkness, the hum of the city fell away, and all that remained was the sound of 2 hearts that had finally found a place to rest, together. If this story reminded you that love can rewrite even the most guarded lives, Let us know in the comments what moment touched you most. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who still believes in second chances. Until the next story, stay inspired